I am here to talk about my son, Hunter. He passed away March 8th of 2022 at the age of 25 of fentanyl poisoning.
We would tell him, like, they don't love you. We love you. People who love you wouldn't do that to you. They wouldn't sell you these things. They wouldn't make you feel this way. They don't love you, and they're not your friends.
He was a funny kid from the day he was born. He had a very large personality, loved pranking his sister, pranking his dad and I. When he was 2, he broke his little arm, and he was with a friend of his, or his best little friend, and his mom, and they were at a cowboy store, and somebody asked him how he broke his arm, and he said, "A bull bucked me off." And the friend's mom was like, "No, a bull did not buck him off." Things like that. He had imaginary friends. One time, he was 2 again. We were moving back to Lubbock, job change for my husband, and he starts screaming at the back of his lungs in the back seat, "Mom, Jesse's hitting me!" Well, Jesse was his imaginary friend. And I pulled over on the side of the road and looked back at him and said if he didn't stop screaming, I was going to whoop the both of them. And so he didn't scream anymore after that. So, yeah, he had a very good imagination.
We would fight. I actually used to bite myself, and then I would tell my mom that he bit me, so I would get to bite him back. And it worked for like years until my mom saw me do it one day, like saw me bite myself. I got in a lot of trouble for that.
And he was a big kid. He was always the biggest in his class. He towered over everyone. And he got to know the principals of his schools very well, because he was always making jokes or just being the class clown.
He's the typical protective older brother. He chased off every boy I ever liked, literally chased them. Some from our front door. He was a good brother. We used to go to Sonic, and his favorite was the ocean water, and we'd just blast music the whole way there and back. Or we'd go to Chick-fil-A. He loved the spicy chicken sandwich. And then we'd go back home, we'd eat, watch that 70s show, just hang out. He was hilarious. He was compassionate. He cared so deeply for the people that he loved. He had so many friends. He was always the center of attention at parties and any family gatherings. He did really great impressions of people, of comedians, and he could do a really good Ron White impression. And so he would do that one a lot for people and make everyone laugh. He was a really funny guy. We liked to play music together. He was very talented. He would write his own songs, and he played guitar. So we liked to sing together, and at like family events, him and my uncles and my dad and me, we would all sing and just play a bunch of different songs, especially at Christmas.
They say the road is no place for the lonesome. That interstate begins to feel like home.
His freshman year, his dad and I received a call from a parent. He was in FFA, which is Future Farmers of America. He showed pigs and a steer. But his freshman year, he showed pigs and had made some really good friends. But I got a call from a parent saying that Hunter and her son were taking hydrocodone. And that just shocked us. So we know that his drug use started in high school, but we thought that after that, because my husband went and pulled him out of school that day and searched his backpack, we searched his room, and we didn't find anything at that time, but we did drug test him. And I think it did come up for hydrocodone, the drug test. But after that, we didn't have really any issues like that until after he graduated. Didn't go to college. That just was not for him. And that's okay. In high school, he did welding and worked on vehicles. He'd been working on vehicles since he was little. He loved working on Daddy's truck. So he learned how to fix engines. And that's what he did. He worked for an air conditioning company for a little while. And then it was Mother's Day of 2016, and we get a call in the middle of the night. And it was the police department, and he had been arrested for DWI. He was 19 at the time, and that just devastated us. He spent the night in jail to sober up. Of course, that is something huge to happen to you. I mean, you get a DWI when you're 19. You would think that would have scared him straight, but it didn't. So when we got that phone call, we had to go up there. Mind you, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and my husband had to bring his vehicle home, and then I drove our vehicle home, and he went to jail. We ended up bailing him out, of course. If I had known now, or known then what I know now, he wouldn't have been bailed out. He would have just had to stay there for a while.
It was Mother's Day, and I came down to give my mom a birthday card. Or not a birthday card, a Mother's Day card. And she was like, sit down, we need to talk. And they told me, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like, I had never imagined that he was even capable of getting in trouble like that. And that was kind of the beginning of, like, everything, really, for me. I was too young when he had gotten in trouble his freshman year for doing the hydrocodone. I was too young to remember that.
And about 6 months later, things went south again. He had come home. He was with his friend, and his friend was driving because Hunter was drunk again. They had been to see a friend of theirs. They had just had a baby, and they went to the hospital to see the baby and the parents and got back. And I don't know, Hunter was being just very sentimental but just acting erratically, and ended up walking out of the house on foot. And that's when his friend told me about the drug use and that he was using cocaine. And I was just floored. I couldn't believe it. We had talked to our kids about using drugs all their life, just say no. So it was a shock. And we ended up, his friend and I went and found him and got him in the vehicle and took him home. And the next morning, I woke up and called a family member. And this is a God thing. They had just gotten out of a rehab, and I didn't know what to do. So I called her, and I was like, I need your help. We've got to take Hunter somewhere. And so she got on the phone with her sponsor, and they found us a rehab in the Dallas area. And my husband was on the phone with them and our insurance, and said that we had to have him there by like 4:00. And this is what you can bring. You can't just bring anything to rehab. You can't bring shoes with laces, hoodies with, drawstrings. It was, I can't remember all of the things that you can't bring, and they search everything. So we had him there, and he stayed for 30 days. It was tough getting him to stay because he called every day, I'm leaving, I'm leaving. He would call and just be ugly to his dad. I mean, just... I'm leaving this place, I'm not coming back. And, I had people praying. I would get on the phone, and I had people praying immediately. And the next day he called and he said, somebody came up to him and started talking about Jesus to him and started praying with him, and he stayed. And Hunter was a Christian. He was saved when he was 4 years old. His dad baptized him when he was 8 or 9. And so, he knew. And he knew that was a God thing that happened. That woman coming up to him and praying with him. And that's exactly what we were asking people to pray for. And God is good that way. But I can tell you 30 days is not long enough for someone to be in rehab. 45 days is not long enough for someone to be in rehab. 3 months isn't long enough. Some need 6 months to a year, if not longer. And sadly, insurance doesn't pay for that. And so every time that he was in rehab, it was 28 to 30 days. And after that, after his first time in rehab, he got home. Man, I thought he was cured. You know, he went to rehab. He's cured. Boy, was I wrong. And, you know, a lot of people think that the road to recovery is like this, when in reality, it's all like that. It's not a straight line. Recovery can be ugly. It was right before Christmas that he got out of his first rehab. And we went through Christmas, went through the new year, had a good Christmas, good New Year, spent it with family. And then I got the call that a friend of his that he had grown up with since elementary had passed away from fentanyl. And that sent my son spiraling. And we didn't know it at the time that sent him spiraling. He ended up moving out, getting his own place. He was going to UTI, which is a diesel mechanic school, and we thought he was doing great. And he wasn't. He stopped going to school. And we got another call in the middle of the night. Everything happens in the middle of the night. And Hunter had run our car up under an 18-wheeler doing 102. And it should have decapitated him, but it didn't. God wasn't finished with him. And we got a call from police officer. They were at a hospital there in DFW. And so we had to go to the hospital.
My parents woke me up 3 a.m, just screaming that Hunter was in the hospital. He was hurt, and he had crashed the car and he was drunk. And we went to the hospital and were there until probably 6 a.m. when they finally released him to go to jail. And then they took me home. I was supposed to go to school that day. And they told me just to stay home and get some sleep.
He was so lucky to be alive, but he walked away with, cuts and bruises. Some required stitches, but for the most part, he was okay. And then they took him to jail, back to jail after that. And we bailed him out again. We hadn't learned our lesson yet, but we bailed him out. Had to take him back to the hospital because he had refused some treatment. And so once we got him, we took him back to the hospital to get additional treatment, and he ended up going back to rehab that night, in the middle of the night. We drove him to, it was a different kind of rehab. It was a behavioral unit, and on the other side of it was rehab. But this one, it didn't last very long. It was only like 2 weeks. So he was only there 2 weeks. And then he did IOP, which is intensive outpatient, for 2 weeks. And, you know, again, thinking he's cured. He's got this down. He's excited. And he just, addiction, you know, just has a strong hold on people. He told us once he was in rehab and I had gone to visit him, and he said, you know, I've been in rehab with Baptist preachers, senators, neuroscientists, astrophysicists, you know, the really smart people. And, you know, addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what color you are. It doesn't care if you have money or not. It'll get anybody. You know, and there's some people that won't agree with me, but addiction is a disease. It's not a moral failure. And addiction doesn't just affect the addict. It affects the whole family. Everybody. And Hunter used to tell me, Mom, I'm a smart addict. No, you're not. You're not a smart addict. My dealers wouldn't do that to me. Yes, they would. The dealers don't love you, and the drugs don't love you. So, yeah, we used to argue about that a lot, about him being a smart addict. I was like, no, you're not.
He had this like sense of self, like he was invincible. He would say he's a smart addict. He's not stupid enough to buy drugs from someone that would kill him. And he knew how much he was taking. He had it under control. And unfortunately, that ended up not being true. Was very trusting of his dealers. I would even say he was friends with them. He was just trusting of everybody. So my now fiance and I were painting my room, and it was at night. It wasn't too late. It was probably like 10 o'clock. And my parents came in and they were like, your brother's house is on fire. We're going to get him, and he's going to come home with us. And at this point in our lives, Hunter wasn't allowed to live with us anymore because of, just for everybody's mental health. It wasn't good for anybody. And so I was kind of weary that he was going to be living with us again. And it put me on edge.
Yeah, one night their house burned down. And so he had to move back in with us. And he had always, for the most part, done really well being on his own and having to make his own decisions. And as I told him, I'm not going to make your appointments for you anymore. If you have court dates, I'm not going to remind you. You know, things like that, that, you know, you're old enough now, you can do this on your own as far as making appointments. And, you know, the enabling is going to stop. And it did. There's a difference between enabling and loving. And people need to learn the difference. We stopped giving him money for the most part. If he needed groceries, I wouldn't give him money. I would go to the grocery store and buy groceries for him, or take him out to eat. But I stopped giving him money because I knew where it was going. And I wasn't going to enable him in that way. You know, I had to set boundaries. You know, you are not allowed to have drugs in our house.
I would see things. We shared a bathroom, and I kept finding spoons in our bathroom. I didn't know it at the time, but it was for heroin use. There would also be dryer sheets everywhere, all in his room, and he would use that. He'd put it on like an empty toilet paper roll and rubber band it, and then when he would smoke weed, he would blow through it, and you can't smell the weed that way. So, and I know that because he would talk about it. So, yeah, he would share more things with me than he would with my parents. And then sometimes I would have to go to my parents about what he told me. He borrowed my car one day. He said he was going to his friend's house, and when he brought it back, there was heroin needles all over the floor of the car. So that was hard to see.
When he moved back in with us after the house burned down, you know, we were just going along, and it wasn't too long after that that his dad, he was supposed to be working, and his dad went upstairs to check on him. And he was in the corner, I think, and there was a syringe on the bed of heroin. And his dad told him that tomorrow morning he was going to have to leave because that boundary was broken. And we've got a daughter that we have to think about. Bless her heart. Through this journey, she was kind of put on the back burner because we're trying to keep our son alive.
There's a term for the other sibling called the glass child. When your sibling has a disease or an addiction, a disability, your parents see a fire that they need to put out, and they put out that fire, and you're left kind of to fend for yourself. Something else that still I struggle with today is sleeping at night because of all the times I was woken up in the middle of the night to something happening. I would have to keep I called it like a go bag for wherever, if something would happen in the middle of the night. That's the bag I would grab to go stay with whatever friend they took me to to go deal with what was happening with him.
For our sanity, for our health, he had to go. And that was really rough. And when he was walking out the door, I handed him 2 boxes of Narcan. And he said, "You just sealed my fate." And I said, "No, I'm trying to save your fate." And that's when I went into my bathroom and I just fell to the ground, and I was just praying and praying. And I was praying for God's will to be done and not my will. God's will is perfect and my will isn't. And for his will to be done no matter what that is. And for me to be able to have peace about it. It was just a couple of days after that. My daughter and I were at Target, and we had been to eat, and then we were at Target. And I told her, I said, "We need to go." I was not feeling well at all. My head was all crazy, and so we went and got in the car, and she had to drive, and I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. And she called her dad and didn't know what to do, didn't know if we should go to the ER or go home. And somehow I managed to get home. And when we got there, my husband ended up calling 911. I was conscious, but non-responsive. And the ambulance got there, I guess the fire department, I don't know. I don't remember much about it, but from what they've told me, they literally had to pull me out of the car. I couldn't do it. And for about 15 hours, I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. It was really scary. I was in the hospital for 3 days. And I think was God telling me, "Okay, you have to take care of yourself. So I'm going to take care of that for you. You're going to rest here for 3 days." So yeah, that was not fun. And shortly after, a couple of weeks after that, I was fine. It was stress related. And then Hunter wanted to go back to he had been in detox, and he wanted to go to rehab back out in Lubbock. That was where his sober community was. He had been out there before. We sent him to 11 or 12 detox and rehabs. But Lubbock was where his sober community was. And so I took him out there. He did good. This was in 21. And he did good for a little bit. And then he didn't. It took him a while. He went to 2 different rehabs there. And he found a different rehab than the one that I had taken him to. I don't know if he had been kicked out of that rehab, but he found a different one that was there. And he was in a really bad place. And like I said, I'm from Lubbock. My family still lives in Lubbock. And he had called my dad to see if he could take him to this new rehab. And like I say, Hunter was in a really bad place. And my dad is one of the greatest men you'll ever meet. Just a godly Christian man. Loved my son. Loves all his grandchildren. But he and my son were, really tight. And they worked on vehicles together and stuff like that. So my dad took him out to this new rehab, and they were in the process of building a new one. And Hunter did great at this new facility. He just did great. And he was sober. He was clean. He would call and he would tell his dad, "Man, you just have no idea how much God is working in my life." And that was just good on this mama heart. Of course, we had heard that before. But this time, it was for real. We had gone down there. Oh, it was in February of 22. And we had gone down there. He wanted us to come and visit. So I was like, okay, we will. And he showed us around the facility, introduced us to the owners and some of the guys that were there. And man, he just had life back in his eyes. And he was telling us about his plans, that he wanted to go to school. He wanted to become a licensed addiction therapist. And, he was going to his meetings. He was sponsoring. And I had not seen the life in my boy's eyes in a long time, in years. And it was there. We spent that weekend there, and then we, you know, saying goodbye that weekend. It was the last hug that I ever got from him. And he gave the best bear hugs. You know, I said earlier, he was a big guy. He was almost 6'5" and 230 pounds. He was a big guy, so he would wrap his big arms around me and, you know, just hug me tight. And his nickname was Sasquatch. And he told me, he goes, "I've got this, Mama." And man, I really thought he did. I was hoping and praying that he did. And then just a couple of weeks later, it seems like it was yesterday, but then again, it seems like it was so long ago. And it was March 8th, 2022. My daughter and I had been at work that day, and my husband worked from home, so he was up in his office. And I was getting ready. I had a meeting that night. And it's about 4:00 in the afternoon. And Keith gets a phone call from a friend of Hunter's. They had been trying to reach him, and they found his number on LinkedIn, I believe, and called. And she was just hysterical. And she said that Hunter had passed away at work. He was at work. The paramedics worked on him for about an hour, maybe longer. I don't remember. But he passed away. Forever 25. My sweet boy.
I had just gotten home from therapy, actually. I had worked that day, and then I had therapy. I came home, and I was laying down in my bed, and my dad was working from home, and his office is upstairs with my room. And he screamed out my name. And I ran into there, and I heard this woman on the phone saying they couldn't resuscitate him. He passed away. I don't really remember a lot after that. I just remember screaming on the floor, and I called my fiance, and he came right away, and I was kind of responsible for calling people. So I was the one that had to make those calls because my parents couldn't. I was responsible for planning his funeral. I signed his death certificate. It's because my parents couldn't do it. And I grieve differently from them. I kind of have to compartmentalize to get things done, and they're very, emotional. And I'm just not that way. I've never been that way.
The weird thing is, Every time we would get a call, they were always in the middle of the night. Everything. I mean, when he lived in San Antonio, he would call his dad in the middle of the night and just be crazy. The call with the DWI in the middle of the night, the call with the crash in the middle of the night. And this was at 4:00 in the afternoon. And that was, I think that was a God thing. We were able to call, our family and our friends, and they, of course, all of our family, they live out of town, but our friends, they were right there, just within 30 minutes. Our house was full. And we had to tell his best friend. And his best friend was getting married the next month. And Hunter was the best man. And they ended up putting a picture of Hunter up at the wedding. And, it said, best man. It was very tastefully done. I tell my son's story through a message of hope, through Jesus Christ. And I told God after he passed away that I will tell his story as long as it glorifies you. And if it just helps one person, then it's worth it. But it is through a message of Jesus Christ.
I think that you shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. You shouldn't be afraid to talk about it while kids are young, like middle school age, even late elementary age. Before they get into middle school, I think it should be talked about in schools. It should be talked about at home. Parents need to lock up their medication in a safe. Children don't need to have access to prescription medication. And, be nosy, be in your kids' business, especially on their phones. Look at who they're talking to, what they're talking about. Try to catch it before it gets too bad, or before it even starts.
I've spoken at a prison. It was very humbling to tell Hunter's story. And like I said before, I tell this as a message of hope through Jesus Christ, because Satan didn't win. The drugs didn't win. Jesus won. Because when my son took his last breath on earth, he took his first breath in heaven, and Jesus was waiting there with open arms. And he's completely healed. He has no more pain. He has no more addiction. He's completely healed. And that is where the hope comes from. I know that I'm going to see him again one day. And when I spoke at the prison, I tell that in my speech. And it was just amazing to see the men, just say, amen. God is good, because he is good. I wouldn't be here today if he wasn't. And the lady that was in charge of the prison ministry, after I was finished speaking, asked if there was anybody that had been delivered from fentanyl, if they would come up and lay hands on me. And there were probably 7 to 10 guys that came up that had been delivered from fentanyl. And they prayed over me, and it was just the most humbling experience. And, people, they would say, well, what was it like to go to a prison? I loved being there. That was where I needed to be. And hopefully I'm going to get to go back. I spoke at a juvenile detention center. And, with juveniles, they sometimes have an attitude. And we were fist bumping, not shaking hands, you fist bump. And so they were walking in, some would give you a fist bump, others would just walk right past you and not even look at you. On the way out, every one of them gave that fist bump, said thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. And, if it just helps one person, it's worth it. So if my son were here today, he would say, your life matters and you are worth it.